The letter lay on the polished mahogany of our entryway table, a stark white rectangle against the dark wood. For 3 years, 1,095 days, the silence from our daughter, Chloe, had been a constant, gaping wound in our lives. Each morning, I would wake with a sliver of foolish hope that today would be the day, and each evening, that hope would curdle into the familiar ache of rejection. Now here it was. Her name, Chloe Miller, was written in the top left corner, the handwriting a little shakier than I remembered, but unmistakably hers. I reached for it, my hand trembling, a lifetime of love and longing surging through me. My heart, a tired old engine at 72, hammered against my ribs with the force of a young man's. She wrote. I breathed, my voice thick. Susan, she finally wrote. My wife, my anchor for 50 years, came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She saw the look on my face, the letter in my hand, and her eyes, usually so full of warmth, clouded with a caution that I didn't understand. I was already fumbling with the envelope, ready to tear it open and devour every word, to find the apology, the explanation, the path back to us. But Susan put a gentle hand on my arm. Wait, Richard, she said, her voice soft but firm. Her touch stopped me cold. I looked at her, my joy dimming into confusion. What is it? What's wrong? It's from Chloe. She didn't answer. She just pointed a steady finger at the envelope in my hand. Look closer, she whispered. Can't you see? This is my true story. For 3 years, I believed my daughter hated me. But the truth, I would soon learn, was 1,000 times more sinister. If you enjoy powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Annoyed and impatient, I did as she asked. I held the letter up to the light, filtering through the stained glass window by the door. At first, I saw nothing. Just the address, our address, written in Chloe's hand. Her name. And the return address. I squinted, my aging eyes struggling with the script. It was written in the same hand, but something was off. The loops of the L's were too tight, the cross of the T too deliberate. It was as if someone was trying to perfectly imitate her writing, but couldn't quite capture the natural flow. It was a forgery, a masterful one, but a forgery nonetheless. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to replace the joy in my chest. Why would someone be faking a letter for my daughter? Then my eyes fell to the address itself, the origin of this cruel trick. It wasn't an apartment in the city or a dorm at some college. It was an estate, a sprawling, infamous property I knew all too well. Blackwood Manor, the home of Marcus Thorne. The name hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back a step, the letter feeling like it was burning my hand. I had to sit down on the bottom stair, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Susan knelt beside me, her hand a warm, steady presence on my back. She had seen it instantly. Her mother's intuition, her artist's eye for detail, had recognized the falseness of the script and the poison in the address long before my hopeful, foolish heart could. Marcus Thorne was not just a name. He was the architect of our family's ruin. My former business partner. The man who had stripped me of my company, my reputation, and my life's work through a campaign of deceit and betrayal so profound it had left me a broken man. And in the fallout, he had somehow captured the loyalty of my then 19-year-old daughter, convincing her that his glittering success was strength and my devastating failure was weakness. Her siding with him was the final, twisting turn of his knife. We hadn't heard from her since. Now this letter. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a threat. It was Marcus, after 3 years of silence, twisting the knife again, using our daughter as his weapon. He was flaunting his ultimate prize. Not just my company, but my child. I looked at the envelope again, the cold dread solidifying into a block of ice in my stomach. They thought I was a defeated old man. They thought I would read this, weep, and accept my final humiliation. But as I stared at the forged handwriting and the hated address, something else began to stir within me. Something that had been dormant for 3 long years. Not anger. Not sorrow. It was a cold, quiet, and terrifying rage. A rage as patient and meticulous as the engineering blueprints I used to draw. Susan looked at me, her eyes searching my face, and she saw the shift. "Richard," she asked softly. I stood up, my back straightening, my joints no longer aching, but humming with a sudden, sharp clarity. "He made a mistake, Susan," I said, my voice low and steady. "He thinks the war is over. He just started a new one." I hadn't just been shocked. I had been activated. The letter remained on the table, an unexploded bomb. Susan made tea, her movements calm and deliberate, the familiar ritual a small anchor in the storm that had just broken over our lives. We sat in the living room, the silence thick with unspoken history. To understand the poison of that return address, you have to understand what Marcus Thorne took from me. We had built Miller and Thorne Engineering from the ground up, a testament to 2 young men's ambition. I was the architect, the designer, the mind behind the structures. Marcus was the face, the salesman, the charmer who brought in the clients. For 20 years, it worked. I trusted him like a brother. But his ambition had no moral compass. It was a ravenous, insatiable thing. He began siphoning funds, cooking the books, and creating a shadow company to redirect our most profitable contracts. By the time I discovered the fraud, it was too late. He had woven a web so complex, so insidious, that he managed to frame me for his own crimes. He painted me as an aging, incompetent engineer whose mistakes were bankrupting the company. He used my trust, my focus on the work rather than the paperwork, as a weapon against me. I was publicly humiliated, forced out of the company I had founded, my name dragged through the mud. I lost everything. We had to sell our larger home, downsize to this modest house my father had left me, and live on my dwindling savings and Susan's income from her art. The financial ruin was devastating, but it was nothing compared to losing Chloe. She was 19, mesmerized by Marcus's charisma and wealth. He told her I had gambled the company away, that I had grown reckless. She saw his new mansion, his fancy cars, and our sudden poverty, and she chose the winner. The last time I saw her, she stood on the lawn of our old house as the moving trucks were being loaded. "You ruined everything, Dad," she had said, her eyes cold. "Marcus is giving me an internship. At least someone knows how to run a business." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and they had stayed lodged in my heart for 3 long years. Now this letter. "He's taunting us," I said, staring into my teacup. "He's showing us that he has her, that he controls her. This isn't from Chloe at all." Susan reached across the table and unfolded the letter, which I had dropped. She read the single page, her expression unreadable. "Maybe," she said slowly, her artist's eyes scanning the page not just for words, but for patterns foretells. But maybe not. She pushed the letter towards me. Read it, Richard. Forget the envelope. Read the words. I picked it up, my hand still feeling the phantom burn of that return address. The letter was short, the tone stilted and strange. It spoke of her wonderful new life, of the incredible opportunities Marcus had given her. It was filled with superficial praise for him and a cold, dismissive tone about her past. It was exactly the kind of cruel, gloating letter Marcus would force her to write. I was about to crumple it in my fist when Susan stopped me again. Read the last line, she insisted. I looked down at the final sentence. It read, I hope you are both well and finally enjoying the quiet life, just like we used to talk about under the old willow tree. My breath caught in my throat. The old willow tree. It had stood in the backyard of our old house. It was Chloe's favorite spot. When she was a little girl, scared of thunderstorms or upset about a scraped knee, we would sit under it together, and I would tell her that this was our magic fort, where only good things could happen, and all the noise of the world went quiet. Just like we used to talk about. It was a phrase, a memory, so specific, so deeply personal, that Marcus Thorne could never have known it. It wasn't part of the public story of our family. It was a secret, whispered code between a father and his daughter. She wasn't just writing what he told her to write. She was screaming for help. She was telling me the life she was describing was the opposite of the quiet, safe place we once shared. She was a prisoner in that fortress of wealth, and she was smuggling a message out to me. The rage inside me shifted, solidifying from a hot, burning anger into a cold, diamond-hard purpose. My daughter wasn't a traitor. She was a captive, and I was going to get her back. He thinks he's playing chess with a pawn, I said to Susan, my voice a low growl. But he's about to find out he's playing against a grandmaster who has nothing left to lose. The first step was clear. We couldn't respond to the letter. We couldn't let Marcus know we had deciphered the code. We had to maintain the illusion that we were the broken, defeated, old couple he believed us to be. But in the shadows, the engineer in me began to wake up. I was going to war, and every war begins with reconnaissance. That night, I didn't sleep. I went to my old study, a room I hadn't used in years, and unrolled a set of blueprints on my dusty drafting table. They weren't for a building. They were the blueprints of a man's life. Marcus Thorne's life. I was going to find a crack in his foundation, and I was going to bring the entire structure crashing down around him. The first rule of engineering is to know your materials. Before you can build, or in this case, demolish, you must understand every strength and every weakness of the structure you're dealing with. Marcus Thorne was my new project. For the next week, Susan and I lived a double life. To the outside world, we were the same quiet, retired couple. I tended my small garden. Susan painted in her studio. We took our evening walks. But when the curtains were drawn, our house became a war room. My old drafting table, once home to plans for bridges and skyscrapers, was now covered in a spiderweb of information about Marcus. I reactivated a part of my mind I thought had rusted shut, the part that saw patterns, connected disparate points of data, and built complex systems. I started with public records, corporate filings, and news articles, building a timeline of his life since he had stolen mine. His new company, Thorne Global, was a behemoth. He had positioned himself as a visionary, a philanthropist. his face gracing the covers of business magazines. He was hosting a major charity gala at his estate in 2 weeks, an event hailed as the philanthropic highlight of the season. It was all a perfect, polished facade. But I knew that every facade, no matter how grand, has to be anchored to a foundation. And I suspected Marcus's foundation was rotten. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed eyes and ears, people who could move in circles I no longer had access to. I made a call to an old friend, Frank, my head of construction for over 15 years before Marcus had unceremoniously fired him. Frank was loyal to a fault, a man who valued integrity over a paycheck, and he hated Marcus as much as I did. I met him at a quiet coffee shop across town. "Richard, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his weathered face etched with concern. I told him everything. The letter, the forged handwriting, the hidden message from Chloe. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring into his coffee. "That son of a bitch," he finally breathed, his knuckles white as he gripped his mug. I always knew he was a snake. "What do you need, Richard?" "Information," I said. "Anything. Rumors, gossip, financial whispers. Is Thorn Global as solid as it looks? I need to know where the cracks are." Frank nodded slowly. "A lot of our old crew ended up working for subcontractors on Thorn's projects. They talk. They see things. Let me make some calls. People will talk to me." While Frank activated his network, Susan worked on a different angle. She reconnected with old friends from the charity board she used to sit on, women who now orbited in Marcus Thorne's glittering social sphere. She played her part beautifully, portraying herself as a woman softened by time, bearing no grudges, simply curious about the lives of old acquaintances. She gathered whispers at art gallery openings and luncheonettes, learning about Marcus's lavish spending, his wife's increasingly desperate attempts to keep up appearances, and the constant pressure he was under to project an image of untouchable success. A picture began to emerge. Marcus wasn't just rich. He was pathologically obsessed with the appearance of being rich. He was leveraged to the hilt, pouring money into a lifestyle that was a constant, frantic performance. This was a critical weakness. A man that desperate to maintain a facade will cut corners. He will take risks. Meanwhile, I focused on the gala. It was the perfect opportunity. His guard would be down, his entire world gathered under one roof. But we couldn't just buy tickets. Our presence would be a red flag. I needed a way in, not as a guest, but as someone who belonged there. I needed a Trojan horse. I found it in the most unlikely of places, the County Planning Commission's public website. I found the submitted plans for a new multi-million-dollar conservatory Marcus was adding to Blackwood Manor. I downloaded the architectural and structural blueprints, files as familiar to me as the back of my own hand. For 2 days, I did nothing but study them, my old skills surging back with a vengeance. The designs were flashy, ostentatious, and rushed. And then I found it. It was a small thing, a detail a less experienced engineer might miss. A miscalculation in the load-bearing capacity of a specific steel truss that would support a massive, suspended glass ceiling. It wasn't an immediate danger, but over time, with seasonal stress and material fatigue, it was a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. It was a structural time bomb, and I had just found the detonator. I showed it to Susan, pointing to the complex equations I had scribbled in the margins of the printed plans. "He's using a substandard grade of steel for this truss, but he's using the weight calculations for high-grade steel. His engineer either made a huge mistake, or more likely, Marcus forced him to cut a corner to save a few $100,000. A slow smile spread across Susan's face. So what are you going to do? My plan was audacious, and it relied entirely on Marcus's two greatest weaknesses, his arrogance and his greed. I was going to call his office. I was not going to be Richard Miller, his hated rival. I was going to be Arthur Vance, a retired independent structural engineer who had noticed a potentially dangerous anomaly in the publicly filed plans and felt it was his civic duty to report it. I would offer a free, private consultation to save him from a future disaster and a world of liability. I would be offering him something for nothing. For a man like Marcus, that would be an irresistible lure. The next morning, my heart pounding, I picked up the phone and dialed the main number for Thorne Global. I pitched my voice a little higher, added a slight, deliberate quaver of old age. Yes, I'd like to speak to Mr. Thorne's office, I said. My name is Arthur Vance. I believe I have some information that could save your employer from a great deal of trouble. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then a crisp, professional voice replied, Mr. Thorne is very busy. Can you state the nature of your call? I took a deep breath. Yes, I said. It's about the glass ceiling in his new conservatory. I'm afraid it's going to collapse. The silence on the other end of the phone was so complete, I thought for a moment I had been disconnected. Then the assistant's voice came back on, a few degrees less icy than before. Please hold, Mr. Vance. I held, my knuckles white on the receiver. This was the first move in a high-stakes chess game, and I had just put my queen in an exposed position. Susan stood across the room, her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide. After what felt like an eternity, a new voice came on the line, deeper, more authoritative. It was Marcus's chief of staff, a man named Peterson. Mr. Vance, he said, his tone slick and condescending. You've made a rather dramatic claim. On what do you base this assessment? I took a breath and let the engineer take over. I didn't use emotion. I used numbers. I spoke about tensile strength, load distribution, and material fatigue coefficients. I used the precise, technical language of my trade, a language I knew Peterson wouldn't understand, but which would sound undeniably authentic and alarming. I was building a case so solid and so technical that to ignore it would be an act of gross negligence. I finished by saying, Look, I'm a retired man. I have no horse in this race. I just happened to see the plans. I noticed the anomaly, and I don't want to see a beautiful structure fail and potentially hurt people. My conscience wouldn't allow me to stay silent. I had laid the bait perfectly. Expertise, a hint of danger, and the irresistible lure of a problem solved for free. Mr. Thorne is a very busy man, especially with the gala this week, Peterson said, but the condescension was gone, replaced by a flicker of genuine concern. However, he appreciates due diligence. Could you be available to meet with him and our chief architect tomorrow morning? Say 10 o'clock at the estate? I believe I can make time for that, I said, trying to keep the triumph out of my quavering, old man voice. I hung up the phone, and a wide grin split my face. Susan rushed over and hugged me. You did it, Richard. You're in. We're in, I corrected her. The Trojan horse was at the gates. The next morning, I dressed not in the suit of a successful CEO, but in the uniform of a retired academic. tweed jacket with worn elbow patches, comfortable slacks, and a slightly rumpled shirt. I was Arthur Vance, a man who cared about structures, not status. As we drove through the imposing iron gates of Blackwood Manor, I felt a surge of cold fury. This was the life he had stolen, the opulence built on my ruin. The manicured lawns, the gleaming fountains, the sheer, unapologetic scale of it all was an insult. I pushed the anger down. Emotion was a liability. Today I was a machine. We were led into a vast, sun-drenched office that overlooked the sprawling gardens. And there he was, Marcus Thorne. He hadn't aged well. The years of ruthless ambition had carved new lines onto his face, and his eyes, though still sharp, held a tired, hunted look. He rose from behind a desk the size of a small car and extended his hand, a predatory smile plastered on his face. "Richard," he said, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. "To what do I owe the honor? I was told to expect an Arthur Vance." I had anticipated this. Of course, he would have his staff vet the name. "A small deception, Marcus," I said, giving him a weak, apologetic smile. "I was afraid you wouldn't take my call if you knew it was me. Old rivalries, you know. But my conscience, it insisted. My performance as a beaten, harmless old man was crucial. I needed him to see me not as a threat, but as a ghost from his past, a pathetic relic he could feel superior to. He bought it completely. His chest puffed out, and he waved me into a chair. Always the dramatist, Richard. So what is this about my ceiling? For the next hour, I walked him and his flustered architect through my calculations. I laid out the blueprints on his massive desk and pointed to the flaw, explaining the inevitable outcome with cold, dispassionate logic. I saw the moment his architect's face went pale. He knew I was right. He knew he had signed off on a dangerous, cost-cutting measure, likely at Marcus's command. Marcus, for his part, was brilliant at hiding his fury. He didn't get angry at his architect. He saw an opportunity. He saw me, his old rival, humbly offering him a solution that would save him millions in future repairs and liabilities, all for the price of his own ego. He clapped the architect on the shoulder. "Well, that's what we pay you the big bucks for, isn't it? To catch these things. Good thing Mr. Miller here has a sharper eye than you do. Get it fixed. Spare no expense." He then turned to me, his smile returning, wider and more condescending than ever. "Richard, I am in your debt. You've saved me a considerable headache. As a small token of my gratitude, I insist you and Susan attend my charity gala this weekend. My guests. It's the least I can do for an old friend." It was perfect. He was giving me the keys to his kingdom as an act of charity, a way to rub my nose in his success. I accepted with a grateful, shuffling humility that seemed to delight him. As we were being shown out, my heart pounding with the success of the mission, I saw her, Chloe. She was walking down the grand staircase, holding a tablet, her face pale and drawn. She looked up, and our eyes met for a fraction of a second. The hope and life that had once danced in her eyes were gone, replaced by a haunted, terrified emptiness. It wasn't the look of a young woman enjoying a privileged life. It was the look of a caged animal. She quickly looked away, her shoulders tensing, as if she was afraid of being seen acknowledging me. But I had seen it. The silent, desperate plea. The mission was no longer just about justice for me. It was about rescuing my daughter from the monster who held her captive. As we walked back to our car, the weight of that look settled on me. The gala was no longer just a reconnaissance mission. It was an extraction. And I had no idea how I was going to pull it off. The 2 days leading up to the gala were a blur of intense, whispered preparations. The image of Chloe's haunted eyes was seared into my mind, a constant, burning reminder of the stakes. This wasn't a game of chess anymore. It was a rescue mission. Frank, my old construction foreman, came through. He met me at a park, handing me a plain manila envelope. "My guys have been talking," he said, his voice low. "Marcus is bleeding money. He's overextended on 3 different international projects, and word is, he's desperately courting a group of foreign investors. This gala isn't about charity, Richard. It's a dog and pony show to convince them he's liquid and successful. He's putting on a play, and the set is his entire life." This was the crack in the foundation I had been looking for. A man desperate for cash is a man who makes mistakes. He was vulnerable. Susan, meanwhile, had prepared our costumes for the play. She had found her old gown from my last CEO of the Year award dinner, a timeless, elegant dark blue dress. For me, she had my best tuxedo pressed and ready. "We need to look the part," she said, her voice firm. Not like charity cases he took pity on. Like we belong there. Like his betrayal was a setback, not a defeat. We need to project quiet dignity. She was right. Our demeanor had to be as carefully constructed as my Arthur Vance persona. On the night of the gala, as I knotted my bow tie, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw the tired lines around my eyes, the gray at my temples. But for the first time in 3 years, I also saw the engineer, the strategist, the fighter looking back. Susan came and stood beside me, a vision in blue, her hand resting on my shoulder. "Ready to walk into the lion's den?" she asked softly. "He's the one who should be afraid," I replied, and I meant it. Blackwood Manor was transformed. Hundreds of cars lined the long, winding driveway. Music drifted from the open terrace doors. The air hummed with the sound of laughter and clinking champagne glasses. It was a symphony of wealth and power. And as we handed our keys to the valet, I felt a tremor of the old inadequacy. But then I felt Susan's hand slip into mine, her grip firm and steady. We were a team. We walked through the grand entrance, and it felt like stepping onto a stage. Marcus had a receiving line set up, and he greeted us with a booming, theatrical warmth, clapping me on the shoulder. "Richard, Susan, so glad you could make it," he announced to everyone within earshot. "Richard here saved my skin this week. A brilliant, brilliant man. He was using me as a prop, a story to tell his wealthy friends about his own magnanimity. It was perfect. It gave us a legitimate reason to be there. Our mission had 2 objectives. Susan's was to mingle, to listen. She was a master at it, moving through the crowd with a gentle smile, her artist's charm drawing people in. She would collect the whispers, the rumors, the gossip about Marcus's financial state. My objective was more dangerous. I needed to get to Marcus's study. I knew from my consultation that it was his nerve center. If there was evidence of his desperation, it would be in there. I circulated for an hour, a glass of sparkling water in my hand, playing the part of the slightly overwhelmed old guest. I found his architect, the one I had humiliated. I approached him with a friendly, sympathetic expression. "No hard feelings, I hope," I said. "I was just doing my job." He was still smarting, but relieved not to have been fired. No, he said quickly. You were right. In fact, I was just looking at the estate's original blueprints in the study. There are a few other anomalies I want to review, thanks to you. It was the opening I needed. The study? I'd love to see those original plans myself, I said, feigning academic curiosity. The original builder of this place was a legend. My manufactured credibility as Arthur Vance was my key. The architect, eager to get back in my good graces and appear diligent, waved me towards a hallway. It's just down there. The door is unlocked. I'll be there in a moment. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked down the quiet, paneled hallway, the noise of the party fading behind me. The door to the study was heavy oak. I slipped inside, my eyes quickly scanning the room. It was opulent, lined with books, a large fireplace at one end, and on the massive desk, a laptop open. This was my chance. I had come prepared. I pulled a tiny USB drive from my pocket. It was loaded with a keystroke logger program, a piece of software my tech-savvy nephew had once shown me. It was a long shot, but if I could install it, I could capture every password, every email, every secret he typed. I had less than a minute. My hands, the hands of an engineer used to precise work, were rock steady. I slid the USB into the port. A small window popped up. Install. I clicked it. A progress bar appeared. 10%. 20. 40. The seconds stretched into an eternity. I heard a sound in the hallway. Footsteps. Coming closer. 60%. 80. 95. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. The doorknob began to turn. The progress bar flashed. Installation complete. I yanked the USB from the port and shoved it in my pocket an instant before the door swung open. Marcus Thorne stood there, a look of mild surprise on his face. Richard? What are you doing in here? He asked, a hint of suspicion creeping into his voice. My mind raced, searching for a plausible explanation. The architect wasn't here yet. I was caught. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs, but my face, I hoped, projected nothing but the mild confusion of a lost old man. I held up my hands in a gesture of harmless apology. Marcus, I am so sorry, I said, my voice laced with the practiced quaver of Arthur Vance. The architect, Mr. Jennings, invited me to look at the original blueprints. I must have gotten ahead of myself. I hope I'm not intruding. I gestured vaguely toward the bookshelf lined with leather-bound volumes. It's a magnificent room, a testament to your success. I was banking on his ego being a stronger force than his suspicion. It worked. His posture relaxed, and the hard edge in his eyes softened. He saw what he wanted to see. His defeated old rival, wandering his palace in a daze of awe and envy. No intrusion at all, Richard, he said, waving a dismissive hand. Make yourself at home. The blueprints are over there in the cabinet. He strode over to a wet bar in the corner of the room and poured himself a whiskey. He was completely disarmed. Just then, the architect, Jennings, bustled in, looking flustered. Ah, here you are, he said, seeing us. Sorry, I got cornered by the senator. The timing was perfect. It validated my story completely. For the next 10 minutes, I had to play the part, poring over the old, brittle blueprints with Jennings, making intelligent comments about cantilevered beams and foundation techniques, all while Marcus swirled his whiskey and watched us with amused detachment. It was the longest 10 minutes of my life. The keystroke logger was installed, but my mission wasn't complete. A keylogger was useless without access to the data it was collecting. It was programmed to upload its data logs to a secure, anonymous cloud server, but it could only do that when the laptop was connected to the internet. And I had a terrible feeling Marcus was the type to shut it down completely when he wasn't using it. I needed a way to ensure that laptop stayed on and stayed connected. As Jennings rolled up the blueprints, I saw my opportunity. On a small table next to the desk was a high-end digital weather station, its screen displaying temperature, barometric pressure, and a dozen other metrics. My goodness, what a fascinating device, I said, walking over to it. I've always been a bit of a weather nut. I picked it up, examining it. As I turned it over in my hands, my thumb, shielded from his view, found the small port on the back. With a dexterity I hadn't used in years, I unplugged its USB power cord from the wall adapter and plugged it directly into a spare USB port on Marcus's laptop. The weather station's screen flickered and came back on, now drawing its power from the computer. Remarkable technology, I said, setting it down. To anyone looking, it would appear completely normal. But I had just created a parasitic power draw. If Marcus tried to put the laptop to sleep, the active USB port powering the weather station would likely prevent it from entering a low power state. It was a subtle trick, a bit of electronic subterfuge that might just keep the channel open. Well, we should let you get back to your party, I said graciously. We left the study, and as the heavy door clicked shut behind me, I allowed myself a single, deep breath. Phase 1 was complete. I rejoined Susan in the main ballroom. She drifted over to me, her face serene, but her eyes sharp. Anything? I whispered. He's desperate, she breathed, her voice barely audible over the string quartet. He's courting a group of Swiss investors. Apparently, his main lender just called in a massive loan, and he has a 90-day window to pay it or he defaults and loses everything. This Swiss deal is his only lifeline. He's been telling everyone it's a done deal, but one of the wives I spoke to said her husband, his broker, is worried. The Swiss are notoriously cautious. They're still doing their due diligence. It all clicked into place. The gala, the grand performance, the frantic need to project success. It was all for the Swiss. We spent another hour at the party, smiling, shaking hands, playing our parts to perfection. I saw Chloe once more from a distance. She was standing by Marcus's side as he spoke to a group of stern-looking men in dark suits. The Swiss, I presumed. She looked like a porcelain doll, beautiful, silent, and breakable. The look on her face was one of pure, soul-crushing exhaustion. We left before the party ended, pleading old age and the need for sleep. The drive home was silent, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The moment we were inside our own home, I went straight to my study and opened my laptop, my hand shaking. I navigated to the secure cloud server, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. I typed in the password. The screen was blank. No data had been uploaded. My stomach plummeted. Had he turned the computer off? Had the power trick not worked? Had the whole dangerous gambit been for nothing? I stared at the empty screen, the weight of my failure crushing me. I had been so close. And then a single line of text appeared. User login, M. Thorne. Password, Chloe 1998. My breath hitched. It was his login for the laptop. And then, the data started to stream in, a torrent of captured information flooding my screen. He had logged back in after the party. The trap had worked. Emails, financial statements, private messages. It was all there. I scrolled through the data logs, a voyeur to his secret life. And then I saw the entry that made my blood run cold. It was a draft of an email to his offshore banker in the Cayman Islands. The subject line was asset transfer. The body of the email was short and chilling. Finalizing the Swiss deal tomorrow. Initiate the full transfer of all liquid assets to account 770 for be the moment it's signed. The girl comes with me. Flight is booked for 7 p.m. Project Nightingale is a go. He wasn't just planning to move his money. He was planning to disappear. And he was taking my daughter with him. The words on the screen, "The girl comes with me," were a declaration of intent so chilling it seemed to lower the temperature in the room. Project Nightingale. It sounded so poetic, but I knew it was the name for the final brutal act of his escape plan. He wasn't just taking my daughter. He was caging his songbird and flying her to a place where I could never reach her. The timeline was terrifyingly short. The Swiss deal was happening tomorrow. The flight was at 7 p.m. We had less than 24 hours to stop a man who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of the getaway. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up my throat, but I forced it down. Panic was a luxury we couldn't afford. "Susan," I called out, my voice tight. "We have a problem." She rushed into the study, and I pointed to the screen. She read the email draft, her face going pale. For a long moment, she was silent, her hand gripping the back of my chair. But when she spoke, her voice was not one of fear, but of cold, hard fury. "That man will not take our daughter," she said, each word a chip of ice. We spent the next hour combing through the keylogger data, the downloaded files, and the fragments of conversations Susan had overheard. We were no longer just looking for a weakness. We were looking for a weapon, something so powerful and so undeniable that it could stop him in his tracks. The scope of his fraud was breathtaking. The gala wasn't just a show for the Swiss investors. It was the centerpiece of a massive money laundering scheme. He was funneling millions of dollars of illicit funds through the charities accounts, mixing it with legitimate donations, and then preparing to move the clean money offshore. The charity, which bore the name of his deceased mother, was nothing but a washing machine for dirty cash. He was using the memory of his own mother to commit fraud, a fact that sickened me to my core. Buried deep in the data logs, we found the final piece of the puzzle. It was a series of frantic messages between Marcus and his broker. The Swiss deal wasn't just a lifeline. It was contingent on one final piece of due diligence. The investors were sending their forensic accountant for a final review of the charity's books at noon tomorrow. Marcus was confident he could fool them. His books were a work of fiction, perfectly balanced, impeccably forged. He had a ledger, the real one, that detailed the true source of the funds, but he was certain no one would ever see it. In one message to his broker, he boasted, "The real books are safe and sound. The official ledger is a masterpiece. The Swiss will see exactly what I want them to see." This was it. This was the fulcrum we could use to move the world. If we could expose the real books, the entire deal would collapse, and his empire would crumble. But where were they? I scanned through the keylog data again, searching for any mention of a safe, a vault, a hiding place. Nothing. I went back to the blueprints of the house, my mind racing. Where would a man like Marcus hide his deepest, darkest secret? Not in a bank. Not in his office. It would be somewhere close. Somewhere he could control. My eyes traced the layout of the study. The fireplace. The bookshelves. The wet bar. I had been in that room. I tried to recall every detail. And then I remembered something. On the wall behind his massive desk was a large, gaudy oil painting of a ship in a storm. A cliched symbol of a captain navigating rough seas. It was perfectly centered, but as I looked at the memory in my mind, something seemed off. It was hung just a little too low for the space. It wasn't art. It was a cover. "The safe is in his study," I said to Susan, my voice ringing with certainty. "Behind that painting of the ship." Now we had a target, but the timeline was still a nightmare. We couldn't go to the police. Marcus was a master of manipulation. He would bury us in legal motions, claim we were vindictive, and in the ensuing chaos, he would be on that 7 p.m. flight with Chloe. We had to stop the Swiss deal before it happened. We had to detonate the bomb at noon during the forensic accountant's review, which meant we had to get into that study, open that safe, and retrieve the real ledger sometime between now and tomorrow morning. The estate would be on high alert after the gala. Security would be everywhere. Breaking into Blackwood Manor seemed like an impossible task, an old man's fantasy. I slumped back in my chair, the weight of that impossibility crushing me. I had the knowledge, but I had no way to act on it. Susan came and stood behind me, her hands on my shoulders. "Richard," she said, her voice filled with a strength that belied the situation. "When you wanted to build our first house, everyone said it was impossible for a young man with no money. You drew the plans, you laid the foundation, and you built it with your own 2 hands. You are an engineer. You see things others don't. You see how systems work. So look at the plans again. There is always a way in." Her faith in me, so absolute and unwavering, was like a splash of cold water. She was right. I wasn't a thief. I was an engineer. And every system, every fortress, has a service entrance. I pulled up the original blueprints of the estate again, not the flashy architectural drawings, but the deep infrastructure plans. The plumbing, the electrical, the HVAC. My eyes scanned the complex web of lines and conduits, a hidden city beneath the opulent floors. And then I saw it, a faint dotted line marked ST01. It was a service tunnel, an old forgotten maintenance conduit that ran from a small external utility shed at the edge of the property, all the way to the main house. It was designed for plumbing and electrical access, and according to the plans, it ran directly underneath Marcus Thorne's study. The discovery of the service tunnel shifted the entire emotional landscape of the night. The crushing weight of impossibility lifted, replaced by the electric hum of a plan taking form. It was a crazy, desperate plan, a plan for a younger man, but it was the only one we had. My mind, the mind of an engineer, began to break down the problem into a series of logical steps. It was a heist, but a heist of my own design. We had a target, the ledger in the safe. We had an entry point, the service tunnel. We had a timeline. We had to be in and out before dawn. and we had a diversion. That was Susan's piece of the puzzle. Security will be focused on the main house and the gates, I explained, tracing the tunnel's path on the blueprint with my finger. But this utility shed is at the far end of the property, near the old service entrance. It's a blind spot. I need you to create a diversion at the main gate, something that will draw all the security personnel there for at least 20 minutes. Susan didn't even hesitate. A hard, determined light shone in her eyes. "Leave that to me," she said. "At 3 a.m., I will have a very convincing, very loud car accident right outside their front gate. A single car incident, running into the stone pillar. It will be a mess of screeching tires and a blaring horn that won't turn off. They'll have no choice but to respond." Her plan was simple, brilliant, and perfectly suited to her quiet strength. She would play the part of a flustered, slightly panicked woman, creating a scene so disruptive it would be an irresistible magnet for every guard on the property. While she held their attention, I would make my move. We spent the next few hours preparing. I gathered my tools, a powerful flashlight, a small crowbar, a set of sturdy gloves, and a copy of the blueprints on my tablet. I dressed in dark clothes, the kind of practical, no-nonsense attire I used to wear when inspecting a construction site. At 72, I was no action hero. My joints ached, and my stamina wasn't what it used to be. The thought of crawling through a dark, cramped tunnel was daunting. But the image of Chloe's terrified face, the sound of Marcus's smug voice in my head, was a fuel more powerful than youth. It was adrenaline born of love and fury. At 2:30 a.m., we drove to a spot a quarter-mile down the road from the Blackwood Manor service entrance. Susan squeezed my hand, her eyes locking with mine. "Be careful, Richard," she whispered. "I will be," I promised. "You too. Stick to the script. You're a distressed citizen, not a secret agent." She gave me a faint smile. I was born for the part. I watched her drive off towards the main gate, then I slipped into the shadows, a ghost moving along the edge of the woods that bordered the estate. I found the utility shed easily. It was old, rusted, and forgotten. The lock was a joke, and my crowbar made short work of it. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rust. I found the access hatch in the floor, just where the blueprint said it would be. I pulled it open, revealing a dark, gaping hole and a rusted iron ladder leading down into the blackness. This was the moment of no return. I took a deep breath, swung my legs over the edge, and began my descent. The tunnel was even worse than I had imagined. It was narrow, forcing me to crouch as I moved. The air was cold and damp, and the only sound was the drip, drip, drip of water from unseen pipes, and the scuttling of unseen things in the darkness. My flashlight beam cut a small, lonely circle in the oppressive black. I moved slowly, methodically, counting my paces, cross-referencing my position with the blueprints on my tablet. After what felt like an eternity of shuffling through the dark, my light fell upon a cluster of pipes and conduits that matched the plans. I was directly beneath the study. Looking up, I saw it, a small, square maintenance grate, bolted shut. The bolts were old and rusted. I put all my strength into them, my muscles screaming in protest. The first one groaned, then gave way, then the second. Finally, the last one snapped, and the grate came loose. I pushed it open and was greeted by the welcome sight of carpet. I was in. I hoisted myself up into the study, my body aching, my clothes covered in grime. The room was silent and dark, moonlight filtering through the tall windows. I moved quickly to the wall behind the desk. The oil painting was just as I remembered it. I lifted it off its hook. It was surprisingly light, a cheap reproduction. And behind it, just as I had predicted, was the flat, gray steel door of a wall safe, a digital keypad glowing faintly in the center. I hadn't come this far to be defeated by a 6-digit code. I took a deep breath and examined the keypad. I didn't have any sophisticated cracking tools. I had something better, my mind. I knew Marcus. He was arrogant, but also sentimental in a self-serving way. His password wouldn't be random. It would mean something to him. I thought back to the keylogger data. Chloe, 1998. The year she was born. It was his laptop password. It was a possibility for the safe, but it felt too obvious. Then, my eyes caught something in the faint light. A faint, almost invisible smudging of oil from fingerprints on the keypad. The numbers 1, 9, 5, 8, 4, and 2 were slightly dulled. 6 numbers. The date of his own birth? The date he founded the company? No, that wasn't it. Then it hit me. 1958, the year his mother was born, the mother whose name he was using for his fraudulent charity. And 42, his age when he finally became sole owner of the company, when he had successfully ruined me. It was a monument to his 2 greatest conquests, his mother's legacy and my life's work. My fingers trembled as I punched in the numbers. 1-9-5-8-4-2. The keypad beeped. A green light flashed. And, with a heavy, satisfying click, the safe unlocked. The heavy thud of the unlocking mechanism was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I pulled the steel door open, my heart hammering against my ribs. The inside of the safe was not filled with cash or jewels, but with documents, folders, files, and one single leather-bound book. It was a simple black accountant's ledger, the kind that had been used for 100 years. I pulled it out. Its weight felt significant, heavy with the secrets it held. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat, precise, and instantly recognizable. It was Marcus's. The entries were not the clean, balanced numbers of the official charity books. This was a shadow ledger, a detailed, damning account of his entire criminal enterprise. Names, dates, and amounts were listed next to coded entries like Nigeria investment, political donation, mayor, and art acquisition unofficial. It was a confession written in black and white. It was more than enough to sink him. I tucked the ledger securely inside my jacket, my mission accomplished. Just as I closed the safe door, I heard the distant but unmistakable sound of Susan's car horn, a continuous, blaring shriek cutting through the night. The diversion had begun. I had to get out. I placed the painting back on the wall, scrambled back through the grate, and pulled it shut behind me. The journey back through the tunnel was a frantic, adrenaline-fueled race against time. Every scuttling sound, every drip of water, sounded like approaching footsteps. I finally emerged into the utility shed, gulping in the damp, musty air, my body screaming with exhaustion. I slipped out into the pre-dawn gloom and made my way back to our meeting point, my mind a whirlwind. I had the evidence. I had the weapon. The question was how to use it for maximum impact, to create a blast so powerful it would not only destroy Marcus, but also protect Chloe from the shrapnel. As I reached the road, Susan's car pulled up, the front bumper crumpled, and the hood slightly bent. She rolled down the window, a look of triumphant concern on her face. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice breathless. "Did you get it?" I tapped my jacket. "I got it," I said, sliding into the passenger seat. "And you?" "They were very helpful," she said with a wry smile. 3 security guards and the head of the estate staff. They were quite concerned about my whiplash. I have all of their names. It took them 25 minutes to disconnect the horn. We drove home in the growing light of dawn, the stolen ledger a warm, heavy presence against my chest. The moment we were inside, I called the one person I knew could help us wield this weapon with the precision of a surgeon. Evelyn Reed, the sharp-as-a-tack lawyer who had helped an old friend of mine out of a similar jam years ago. I got her on her private line, waking her up. "Ms. Reed," I said, my voice low and urgent. "My name is Richard Miller. I need your help. It concerns Marcus Thorne, and I have something that belongs to him that he will be very keen to get back." There was a pause, and then her voice, suddenly wide awake and interested, came on the line. "Meet me at my office in 1 hour. Come in the back entrance." Evelyn's office, even at 6 a.m., was a hive of quiet energy. She was a force of nature, a woman who radiated a terrifying competence. We laid everything out on her conference table: the ledger, the keylogger data, the timeline. She listened without interruption, her eyes scanning the documents, her mind connecting the dots with a speed that was stunning. When we finished, she leaned back in her chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "Mr. Miller," she said, "you have just handed me a nuclear bomb. The question is not whether we can stop him, but how spectacularly we want him to burn. We couldn't just hand the ledger over to the police." Evelyn confirmed my fears. Marcus's lawyers would immediately claim it was a forgery, a fabrication by a vindictive ex-partner. They would tie it up in court for years. We needed a strategy that was swift, public, and undeniable. "The Swiss accountant arrives at noon," Evelyn said, tapping the timeline. "That is our D-Day. We are not going to attack Marcus. We are going to let Marcus's own greed deliver the killing blow." The plan she devised was breathtaking in its elegant brutality. At 11:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the meeting, an anonymous courier would deliver a package to the Swiss forensic accountant at his hotel. The package would contain 2 things: a high-quality, color photocopy of the first 10 pages of the real ledger, and a simple, unsigned note that read, "Asked to see the 2021 art acquisition, unofficial receipts. Compare them to the official ledger. He will show you. He thinks you are a fool." It was a poisoned seed of doubt. The accountant, a man whose entire career was built on skepticism, would have no choice but to investigate. He would walk into that noon meeting not as a friendly partner, but as an inquisitor. "This will collapse the deal," Evelyn explained. "The Swiss will run for the hills. But that's not enough. We want to checkmate him." At exactly 12:05 p.m., while Marcus was sweating under the accountant's unexpected scrutiny, Evelyn would make 2 calls. The first would be an anonymous tip to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The second would be to the State Attorney General's office. She would provide them with the same sample pages from a ledger and tell them that the original was currently in the possession of Marcus Thorne at Blackwood Manor, and that he had a 7 p.m. flight booked to the Cayman Islands. We will create a pincer movement, she said, her eyes gleaming. His business partners will abandon him from the front, and the government will close in from the back. He will have nowhere to run. It was a masterstroke, a plan that would use the system itself to create a perfect, inescapable trap. The hours until noon were the longest of my life. Evelyn's team prepared the package. We waited. At 11:45, the courier confirmed delivery. The seed was planted. All we could do now was wait for it to sprout. The minutes between 11:45 a.m. and noon stretched into an eternity. We sat in Evelyn Reed's conference room, the original ledger lying on the table like a holy relic, a testament to the night's madness. The city bustled outside the window, oblivious to the drama unfolding, the silent, invisible threads of a man's empire being snipped one by one. My thoughts were with Chloe. I pictured her in that house, a pawn in a game she didn't understand, packing a bag for a trip she didn't know was a kidnapping. A fresh wave of protective fury washed over me. This wasn't just for justice. It was for her freedom. At precisely 12:05 p.m., Evelyn picked up her phone. Her face was a mask of calm, professional focus. Yes, I'd like to report a suspected case of significant tax fraud and money laundering, she said to the IRS, her voice devoid of emotion. She laid out the details coolly, clinically, referencing the sample pages, the charity's name, and Marcus's imminent flight risk. She hung up and immediately made the second call to the state attorney general. She repeated the process, adding a layer of urgency about the scale of the fraud against the people of the state. When she hung up the second time, she looked at us and gave a curt, single nod. The dogs have been released, she said. Now, the waiting was of a different kind. It was the silence after pulling the pin on a grenade. We could only imagine the scene at Blackwood Manor. The Swiss accountant, armed with his 10 pages of poison, asking questions that had no good answers. The polite facade of the meeting cracking, then shattering. Marcus, the master of control, feeling that control slip through his fingers. The dawning horror on his face as he realized his perfectly constructed world was imploding. We didn't have to imagine for long. At 1:30 p.m., Evelyn's phone buzzed with a message from a source she had in the financial world. It was a single sentence. Swiss deal is dead. Thorne's broker is in freefall. A collective sigh of relief filled the room. The first domino had fallen. Marcus's financial lifeline was cut. But the real drama was yet to come. I couldn't sit still. I paced the office, my mind's eye fixed on that 7 p.m. flight. He was cornered. What would a cornered animal do? Would he try to run? Would he take Chloe with him? The fear for her safety was a physical pain. At 3:45 p.m., a news alert flashed on one of Evelyn's many screens. Federal agents raid home of billionaire philanthropist Marcus Thorne. The headline was stark and beautiful. Attached was a live helicopter shot of Blackwood Manor. A fleet of black government vehicles was swarming the property, their lights flashing silently from above. Agents in windbreakers were pouring into the house. It was a scene of total, systemic invasion. The fortress had been breached, not by an old man in a tunnel, but by the full, righteous weight of the law he had so arrogantly mocked. I watched the screen, mesmerized, my breath held tight in my chest. I scanned the grounds, the windows, looking for any sign of Chloe. Then I saw her. She was being escorted out a side door by a female agent, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked pale, shaken, and utterly bewildered, but she was safe. She was away from him. The relief that washed over me was so immense it almost brought me to my knees. I sank into a chair, the tension of the last 48 hours finally draining out of me, leaving me weak and trembling. Susan was weeping silently beside me, tears of relief and joy. Marcus was brought out a few minutes later in handcuffs. The swagger was gone. The condescending smile was gone. He looked small, shrunken, his expensive suit rumpled. As they led him to one of the black cars, he looked up at the news helicopter, and for a moment, his eyes seemed to stare directly into the camera, directly at me. They were filled not with anger, but with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. The look of a master manipulator who had finally been so completely and utterly outmaneuvered that he couldn't even comprehend it. He, the Grandmaster, had been checkmated by a pawn he had discarded years ago. The rest of the day was a blur of news reports and updates from Evelyn. The original ledger was anonymously delivered to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the final nail in Marcus's coffin. His assets were frozen. His empire had crumbled to dust in the space of a few hours. But none of that mattered. All I could think about was Chloe. Late that evening, back in the quiet sanctuary of our own home, the phone rang. I picked it up, my hand shaking for an entirely different reason than it had been 2 days before. There was a hesitant pause on the other end, a sound I had dreamed of hearing for 3 long years. Then a small, fragile voice, a voice I would know anywhere. "Dad," Chloe said, her voice cracking with a sob. "Dad, they said I can go. Can I please come home?" I closed my eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime still on my cheek. "You are home, sweetheart," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "We're waiting for you." The war was over. The battle was won. Now the long, difficult work of rebuilding could begin. The hour we spent waiting for Chloe to arrive was filled with a nervous, fragile hope. We didn't talk much. Susan tidied up the living room, fluffing pillows that didn't need fluffing. I made a fresh pot of coffee, my hands moving on autopilot. What do you say to a daughter you haven't spoken to in 3 years? A daughter who has been a captive, a victim of the same man who destroyed you? How do you bridge a chasm that wide and that deep? When the headlights of the police car swept across our living room window, we both froze. A young, kind-faced officer escorted Chloe to the door. When she stepped inside, she looked like a ghost. The stylish, confident young woman from the photos in Marcus's society pages was gone. In her place was a thin, pale girl who looked no older than 16, her eyes wide and haunted, swimming in a sea of shame and exhaustion. She stood in the doorway, clutching a small backpack, looking at us as if she expected to be turned away. "Mom? Dad?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Susan, without a word, crossed the room and wrapped her arms around our daughter. Chloe collapsed into her embrace, and a sound broke from her, a raw, ragged sob of grief and relief that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. It was the sound of a dam breaking after years of holding back a flood of pain. I stood back, my own heart aching, giving them the moment. After a long time, Chloe pulled away, her eyes red and swollen, and looked at me. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she cried, tears streaming down her face again. "I was so stupid." I believed him. I believed all his lies about you. And by the time I realized the truth, it was too late. He had everything: my bank account, my phone, he controlled everything. I was so ashamed. I didn't know how to get out. I stepped forward and put my hand on her shoulder. The "I told you so" I had rehearsed in my mind 1,000 times over the years had vanished, replaced by a simple, overwhelming love. "You were 19, Chloe," I said softly. He fooled experienced businessmen and politicians. He fooled me for 20 years. You don't have to be ashamed. You were a victim. We were all his victims. We spent the rest of the night talking, the three of us huddled together on our old, comfortable couch. She told us her story. The initial glamour and excitement of her internship had quickly faded. Marcus had systematically isolated her, cutting her off from old friends, feeding her a constant diet of poison about us, and slowly taking control of every aspect of her life until she was utterly dependent on him. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, a prop for his public image as a family man. The letter, she explained, had been his idea of a final, cruel taunt. He had dictated it to her, but as she wrote it, she had the desperate idea to embed a message, a secret handshake from her childhood, praying I would understand. It was the bravest thing she had ever done. We didn't talk about the heist, the ledger, or my role in Marcus's downfall. Tonight was not about my victory. It was about her survival. We just listened, we validated her pain, and we welcomed her home. For the first time in 3 years, the three of us were under the same roof, and the house, which had felt so empty for so long, finally felt whole again. The healing would be a long process, I knew. The scars were deep for all of us. But as I watched Susan tuck a blanket around our sleeping daughter on the couch, just as she had when Chloe was a little girl, I felt a sense of profound peace. We had our family back. My revenge was complete, not because Marcus was in jail, but because Chloe was home. A few days later, a letter arrived, forwarded from our lawyer. The envelope was cheap, the handwriting on it a spidery, angry scrawl. It was from the county jail. It was from Marcus. Susan looked at me, her expression worried. "You don't have to read that, Richard." I knew she was right. His power was gone. His threats were empty. But I needed to. I needed to see the final, pathetic thrashing of the monster I had slain. I opened the letter. It was not an apology. It was a tirade, a venomous stream of consciousness filled with threats and accusations. He accused me of ruining him, of planting evidence, of being a thief. He promised retaliation, that his lawyers would destroy me, that I would pay for what I had done. It was the desperate rant of a narcissist who was incapable of seeing his own role in his downfall. He still thought he was the master of the universe, temporarily inconvenienced. He still didn't understand that his own arrogance had been the weapon I had used against him. I read the letter, and I felt nothing. No anger. No fear. Not even satisfaction. All I felt was a distant, clinical pity for this small, broken man. His words had no power over me anymore. I walked over to the fireplace, where a small, cheerful fire was crackling, warding off the autumn chill. I held the letter over the flames, and I let it go. I watched as the paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. I watched his angry, useless words disappear into smoke and float up the chimney, gone forever. His reign of terror, his hold over my family, was finally completely over. I turned away from the fire, leaving the last vestiges of him to burn, and went to find my wife and daughter. The future was waiting. The autumn that followed was a season of quiet rebuilding. The news cycle eventually moved on from Marcus Thorne's spectacular downfall, leaving him to languish in the legal quagmire he had created. His name became a ghost, a bad memory that had no place in our home. Our focus was on the present, on rediscovering the simple rhythms of being a family. Chloe was fragile, like a boat that had been through a terrible storm, but she was resilient. She started therapy to unpack the years of manipulation, and she began taking art classes with Susan, her laughter slowly but surely returning to our quiet house. She and I found our way back to each other in the workshop. Just like when she was a little girl, she would sit and watch me work, asking questions, her curiosity a balm to my soul. I taught her how to distinguish oak from maple by its grain, how to use a wood lathe, how to feel the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and tangible with her own hands. We weren't just building bookshelves and picture frames. We were rebuilding the trust and connection that had been stolen from us. We were rebuilding her. One crisp Saturday afternoon, I was showing her how to restore an old rocking chair that had belonged to my grandmother. It was delicate work, requiring a patient hand. As we worked side by side, sanding down the old varnish, she grew quiet. "I still feel guilty, Dad," she said softly, not looking at me. "I should have been stronger. I should have known better." I stopped sanding and put my hand on hers. "Chloe," I said firmly, "look at me." She lifted her eyes, and I saw the familiar shadow of shame in them. "The strongest thing you did was survive. The bravest thing you did was send that letter. You never gave up hope, even when you were trapped. That's not weakness. That's the greatest strength there is." I told her everything then, about the hidden message I'd understood, the fake identity, the gala, the blueprints, the service tunnel, the safe. I told her how her secret message had been the catalyst for the entire plan. I wanted her to see that she hadn't been a passive victim waiting for rescue. She had been the one who had lit the fuse. As she listened, her expression shifted from shame to astonishment, and then to a slow dawning pride. She hadn't been a pawn. She had been the queen, making the single most important move of the game. "So it was me," she whispered, a small smile touching her lips for the first time when talking about that dark period. "I started it." "You started it," I confirmed with a nod. "You saved yourself, Chloe. We just helped with the engineering." A weight I didn't even know she was still carrying seemed to lift from her shoulders. She was not the cause of the problem. She was the author of the solution. It was the final key to unlocking her own cage. Life settled into a peaceful, happy routine. Chloe decided to go back to school, not for business, but for landscape architecture. A perfect fusion of my engineering mind and her mother's artistic soul. She had found her own path. One evening, the three of us were sitting on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air was cool and smelled of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. It was a simple, perfect moment. "I was thinking," Chloe said, turning to me. "That old willow tree at the old house. I know we can't get it back. But maybe we could plant one here." I looked at her, then at Susan. My wife's eyes were shining. My heart felt so full it might burst. The old willow tree had been a symbol of a past that was stolen, a sanctuary that was lost. Planting a new one was not about replacing what we'd lost. It was about creating something new, something that was entirely our own, born from the ashes of our shared trauma. It was a testament to our survival. I think, I said, a wide smile spreading across my face, that's the best piece of engineering I've heard in a long time. The next weekend, we did just that. The three of us, together, dug a hole in the rich soil of our backyard and planted a small, sapling willow. As we patted the earth around its base, I knew that this was the true victory. My revenge wasn't the downfall of Marcus Thorne. It was this moment. My family whole again. My daughter free and smiling. My wife, my rock by my side. It was the quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying work of rebuilding a life, of planting a new tree, and having the faith to watch it grow. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that its branches would grow strong, reaching for the sun, a living monument to the family that had weathered the storm and come out the other side, together.